Hi guys, this is Todd from the R Sword Bible blog, and today I've got some practical advice from you, some inspiration from God, some wisdom, and the topic is children. I've compiled a list of scriptures of practical parenting advice in the Bible. What does the Bible say about how to parent your children? And I'm not going to wax really eloquent about what I think these mean and what my own interpretation and my own ideas added in there. None of that. I'm just going to give you the scriptures, and you can do with these what you want. So start in Genesis 18 and verse 19. Genesis 18. And so, yeah, this is just kind of a resource for you if you've wondered what kind of things the Bible says about parenting. I'm going to lay all these out for you, and you might be surprised. Genesis 18, verse 19. And it reads, "For I have known him in order that he may command his children that they keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him." All right, so here, what you see here is the first idea that I found here, and this is kind of going from the beginning to the end of Scripture. The first idea that I found here is that you are to command your children and your household after you to do what? To keep the way of the Lord. Okay, so that's the first thing, is command your children to keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice. Now, the way of the Lord obviously is righteousness and justice, okay? Teach your kids, not just teach them, command them. It doesn't say just suggest to them. It says command them to keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice. And that way, the Lord may be able to work in your life and fulfill that which he has promised you. See, it says, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. So if you want to unlock God's blessings in the life of your household, your children, the first step, according to this verse, is you're going to have to command them to keep the way of the Lord and to do righteousness and justice. Okay, Exodus chapter 12. Move on to Exodus chapter 12. You know, I was wondering whether I should do this type of format where I'm just speaking to the camera as if I'm talking to you face to face, giving a sermon, whatever, or whether I should, you know, there's been a couple videos like the one where I'm talking about Angus T. Jones and Hollywood or something like that, entertainment, Christian entertainment, you know, where I just held the camera and really, you know, I was just showing you the verses, you know, because I believe that probably that was a little more, you know, that was I'm not sure. I'm not sure what would be better, or if that would just lose your attention, because I want the attention not to be on me, but to be on the Word. So I really, really, really hope and strongly suggest, command even, that you have your own Bibles when you are listening to these messages, and that you're actually turning to the verses and reading them, looking at them, studying them for yourself, writing them down so you can go back later and look at them and see whether these things are so. So Exodus chapter 12 and verse 26. And it says, "And it shall be, when your children say to you, 'What do you mean by this service?' that you shall say, 'It is the Passover sacrifice of the Lord, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he struck the Egyptians and delivered our households.' So the people bowed their heads and worshipped." Now, this is talking about, the context is, this is talking about Israel's being saved out of Egypt, and God has just instituted them, told them, you need to sacrifice this lamb, you need to apply the blood to the doorposts, okay? And then, you know, you need to eat this unleavened bread and this, you know, this meat of the sacrifice with that, you know, with bitter herbs or whatever. And you need to have your have yourself all girded up and ready to go as you're eating this. That this is to be not a one-time event, but he says you set up a memorial and you do this every year. You celebrate this Passover. And what was the reason for that? So that, verse 26, that when your children say to you, what do you mean by this service? That you can say, you can tell them the story of God's intervention in your life. Now, this is a recurring theme that you'll find in the Bible. God's instruction to parents to do this, to do that, to set up this service, to stack up these stones, so that, he says, so that when your children see these things, see this service or see this this pile of stone, this memorial, this altar, and they ask, what is the meaning of this, that you can tell them. So one of the big things in Scripture is to do these things, to set up these memorials, to go through these services, so that your children's curiosity will be piqued, and then you can use that as a springboard to explain God's working in our lives. Deuteronomy 4, and start with verse 8. Deuteronomy 4, verse 8 through 10. And it reads, "And what great nation is there that has God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us, for whatever reason we may call upon him? And what great nation is there that has such statutes and righteous judgments as are in all this law which I set before you this day? Only take heed to yourself and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life, and teach them to your children and your grandchildren." God wants you to teach your children and grandchildren the things of God that you've seen and the righteous decrees and laws that God has spoken. So you're commanded to command your children to walk in the ways of the Lord and to do righteousness and justice. You're to go through these services so that you may explain to your children what the significance of them is when they ask, and you are to teach the Lord's decrees and laws of righteousness to your children. So practically, what I'm saying is, when is the last time that you, went through some ordinance, maybe the communion service with your children, partaken of the bread and the wine and the foot washing ordinance? When's the last time that you went through these things and explain them to your children? When's the last time that you actively sat down and taught your children or grandchildren the righteous laws and decrees of the Lord? When's the last time you actually went down and said, you know what, let's take a look at some of these 10 commandments. Let's talk about them. Let's talk about what they mean, why they are righteous, why God's law is holy and good and everlasting. And that can also be seen in Exodus 19:9, and these are the things that we are teaching them. When he said, teach your children and grandchildren these righteous decrees and the laws, he was referring to Exodus 19:9, Exodus 20, verse 1 to 17, the 10 Commandments. He was referring to these things. Deuteronomy chapter 6. Go next to Deuteronomy chapter 6. And let's see, verse 6 to 9. "And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart." Now, Deuteronomy 5 is the 10 Commandments. Exodus 20 is obviously the 10 Commandments. Deuteronomy 5 is another retelling by Moses of the 10 Commandments. Deuteronomy is like Moses' swan song, Moses' last address to the people. It's the last book of Moses, and it says farewell address. And of course, he goes over the 10 Commandments in Deuteronomy 5. And so here in Deuteronomy 6, he says, and these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So these laws of God, this is not just a one-time teaching. This is not like the talk about the birds and the bees. Okay, check, you know that, we're done. No. You need to always be talking about these things. I mean, how emphatic can God be, right? When he says, teach them diligently to your children. Talk of them when you sit, when you walk, when you lie down, when you rise up. Bind them on your doorpost and on your gates. I mean, it's just emphatic, the sense of go over this and go over this and go over this. It's not done. These things need to be constantly placed in the minds of your children. Deuteronomy 11. You can see a lot of stuff we were getting from Deuteronomy. 11 verse 13. Deuteronomy 11 verse 13, and it says, and it shall be that if you earnestly obey my commandments, which I command you today, to love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. And then go down to verse 19. You shall teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, when you lie down and when you rise up. Verse 20, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, that your days and the days of your children may be multiplied in the land of which the Lord swore to your fathers to give them, like the days of the heavens above the earth. So again, you see this idea, and it's almost verbatim of what you just read. Moses again just emphasizes this thing, takes it to a whole nother level of emphasis. He's really trying to drive this point home that you need to be talking about the laws of God to your children, always keeping them always in their mind. Deuteronomy 32. Deuteronomy chapter 32 and verse 46. Now this is just after the Song of Moses. And he said to them, this is Moses. Moses finished, let's start with verse 45. Moses finished speaking all these words to all Israel. And he said to them, verse 46, set your hearts on all the words which I testify among you today, which you shall command your children to be careful to observe all the words of this law. So here again, tell these things, command these things to your children. Talk to your children about these things. Command them to walk in the way of the Lord, to do righteousness, to do justice. Teach them all the words of this law. How important is this? Incredibly important. Incredibly important. So this is like the foundation of parenting, is to impart the laws of God to your children, to teach your children the commands, the laws of God, that they are righteousness and justice, and teach them to walk in them, command them to walk in them. Now let's go to Joshua chapter 4. And verse 4 through 7. Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, one man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, cross over before the ark. They're crossing the river Jordan now. Cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in times to come, saying, what do these stones mean to you? Now, this is what I was talking about before, commemorating the great works of the Lord, so that when your children are old enough to ask about them, you can recall for them the merciful power of God. And then look in verse 21 and 22. Then he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? That you shall let your children know, saying, Israel crossed over this Jordan on dry land. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed over. That the peoples of the earth may know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. So again, we are to commemorate, build these memorials to the Lord. You know, it doesn't have to be in an actual stone altar. You know, I actually considered, building these things, or maybe having pictures, special pictures, with an inscription of maybe different miracles that God has worked in my life. Having some kind of visible display that your children will ask about, and that will be the impetus to you teaching them and telling them, recounting to them. Maybe just a journal. Maybe my friend has started an Ebenezer journal because we are commanded to. And so he has started this little journal, and it may, keeping track of God's miracles, God's answered prayers, the way God has actively worked in his life. And maybe it will be that someday his children will be looking through this journal and he can tell them of all these wonderful works. Proverbs. Now, Proverbs is the other heavy hitter. So you see a lot in Deuteronomy about how we are to teach our children, how we are to be good parents, the kind of parents that God calls us to be. The other book is Proverbs, that you are going to find a lot of information in as far as parenting goes. Now we're going to start in Proverbs 13. Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 24. He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. He who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. That speaks for itself. I'm not going to talk any more about it. Proverbs 19. Proverbs 19 and verse 18. Chasten your son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. Do you notice the time element there? Chasten your son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. Did you notice from the previous verse that discipline him promptly? Are you seeing the time element in this? Chasten your son while there is hope. Do not set your heart on his destruction. Proverbs 20 and verse 11. And it reads, even a child is known by his deeds, whether what he does is pure and right. What is it? It's funny because there's a lot of parents out there that you'll see, and if their child is misbehaving or is constantly getting in trouble, doing what they're not supposed to be doing, not listening, being disrespectful, and you'll hear parents say this quite often, he's got a really sweet heart. He's really a sweet child. It's like there's a level of denial that parents have with our own children. And I am familiar with that. I'm a parent. You've seen my son Dominic. He's in school today. But, there's such a temptation not to look at the deeds, what the child actually does, but to look at the heart of the child, what you believe the child is inside. He made some bad choices, but he's really a good kid. But the Bible has a much more black and white, down to earth, realistic approach. It says, look at the deeds of your child. Look at what your child does. My paraphrase of this is, do not ignore the actions of a child because they're only a kid. You hear that too. you hear that excuse a lot. Well, you can't expect too much. He's only a kid after all. No, 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 no. Age is no excuse for disobedience. So do not ignore the actions of a child because they are only a child. Instead, learn from them whether your parenting needs correction. Even a child is known by his deeds, whether what he does is pure and right. So we should not ignore these. We should judge, judge our child's actions. Don't ignore them, and we can learn whether our parenting needs correction. It's not, if your child's actions are not the pure and the right actions, it doesn't speak as much to them as it does to our parenting. Now, regardless of the amount of perfect parenting you give, there's still free will, and good parenting doesn't negate free will. God is the perfect parent, yet Lucifer rebelled in heaven. God is the perfect parent, yet Adam and Eve rebelled. I'm sure Adam and Eve were amazing parents, yet their firstborn Cain murdered his brother. So, while it doesn't guarantee obedience and rightness, their deeds do speak to our parenting. And we can't ignore that. We need to go back over these things and say, what am I not doing? If my child is consistently having bad deeds, bad actions, am I commanding him to walk in the way of the Lord? Am I teaching him God's laws of righteousness and justice? Am I setting up these memorials, these little things that will spark his interest and that I can use to explain to him the way God has worked in the past? Am I doing all this stuff? Am I disciplining him promptly and consistently? If there's no discipline, if there's no consistent consequence, discipline for his wrong actions, then what do you expect? You are actively teaching him to go the wrong way. That's what that last verse meant by do not set your heart on his destruction. We own a lot of the responsibility for that. Let's see. Let's go to Proverbs 22. Proverbs 22 and verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now, another way to read that is, he will not depart from it. He can't get away from it. If you train up a child consistently, if you do these things the Lord has said, then when he is old, he will not depart from it. That training will never leave him. Even if he chooses to rebel and go his own way, that training will still be with him, speaking to his heart and his conscience, rebuking him, saying, that's not right. You know the commands of the Lord. You know what the Lord commands of you. You know his commands of righteousness and justice. What I have written here is, what you teach a child will stick with them throughout their life, always speaking to their heart. Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go. Which way is that? The way of the Lord. Remember that? Command your children to walk in the way of the Lord. Teaching them to do righteousness and justice. Teaching them diligently, teaching them his law. When you lie down, when you rise up, when you're walking by the way, when you're sitting, have them posted on your doorpost, on your gates. I cannot wait till I can find a nice big poster or replica of the actual Ten Commandments stones to have on the wall in my new apartment. So I will definitely show you guys when I find that. Let's see. Okay, and same chapter, go down to verse 15. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of correction will drive it far from him. Now, a couple things you need to see here is foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. Don't ignore that. Understand that we are born with a fallen, sinful nature, with an inclination, with a tendency to sin, to evil, to selfishness. Understand that your child has that in them. They're not born with this pure, sweet heart. No, 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 no. You don't have to teach a child to be selfish and not share. Kids naturally will not want to share. They'll want the best for themselves. We have to teach them to share, to be unselfish, because, their natural inclination is the other way. So yeah, what I've written is we are all born with a selfish nature. We all need correction. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of correction will drive it far from him. Understand that your child will, by default, need correction, because this is the situation, this is the reality that we're born into because of the sins of our parents and our parents' parents and our parents' parents' parents all the way back to Adam. Because this sinful nature has been degrading us and degrading us, we are born in need of correction. We are born on the wrong path, needing to be slowly, gently, lovingly guided back to the right path. We're not born on the right path and then we get on the wrong path. We're born on the wrong path. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, and we need to be put back on the right path. Let's see. Proverbs 23, next chapter. Proverbs 23, verses 13 and 14. You shall beat him, verse 13. Do not withhold correction from a child, for if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. It's plain there. So, there's not, you can tell there that it's not talking figuratively, beating him with a rod as in, a good tongue lashing. It's not talking about putting him in timeout, although obviously, that I have nothing against that stuff, but you can't take these verses of the Bible about physical discipline and you can't just write them off as talking about something else. Here you can very clearly see that it's talking about physical discipline. It even says, if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. Saying it's not going to kill him. Now, no one is going to argue that words or tongue lashing is going to kill somebody. All right. This is very clearly talking about physical discipline. Don't neglect your duty to correct your child. Their salvation may depend on it. That's what I have written for this verse. Do not withhold correction from a child. Do not neglect your responsibility to discipline your child. For you shall beat him with the rod and deliver his soul from hell. Because foolishness comes prepackaged, bound up in the heart of a child. They need discipline. It's your job to teach them, to guide them, to give them correction, and to give them praise. Let's see. Go to chapter 29, Proverbs chapter 29. And let's see, we're looking at verse 15. 29 verse 15. The rod and rebuke give wisdom. So here you again see the differentiation between physical punishment, actual physical discipline, and rebuke, and verbal discipline. Okay? The rod and rebuke give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. Again, you see this. If you neglect the discipline, the correction of your child, he will bring shame, because foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. Okay? We need this. Please do not ignore your children. Do not leave them to themselves. They need correction. They need teaching. They need rebuke. They need wisdom. I have correction is beneficial. Lack of correction is harmful. So you can see the rod and rebuke give wisdom. Correction is beneficial. Lack of correction is not neutral. It is harmful. But a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. It's not optional. There's no riding the fence. Either you give consistent correction and that benefits your child, or you withhold correction and you harm your child. You have to choose. Are you going to harm your child, or are you going to benefit your child? Correct, discipline, or leaving the child to themselves. Okay, let's see what's next. Verse 17. Correct your son, and he will give you rest. Yes, he will give delight to your soul. I have written here, diligence in correction now will make parenting easier later and a delight. Now you can see how that works, right? Correct your son, and remember, discipline him promptly. Discipline him while there is hope. Correct your son, and he will give you rest. It will get easier. You see that in the verse, in the previous verses, that if you discipline him promptly, if you discipline him consistently and in the right way, that he will give you rest. He will learn from that. The Bible promises the rod and rebuke give wisdom. So that will make your parenting easier later. You won't have to give that rebuke and that correction forever. And it will become a delight. Yes, he will give delight to your soul. Okay? So if you want to delight in your child, and if you want to have rest, if you want parenting to be easier and more restful, what do you need to do? Correct your son. Okay? Correct your children. Let's see. Joel chapter 1. Joel, that's going to be over there in the Minor Prophets. Joel, right before Amos, right after Hosea. Joel chapter 1 and verse 3. Tell your children about it. Let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. Now, what is it speaking of here? What happened in the book of Joel is this plague of locusts, right? Came and just devoured everything. And it was a judgment from God. God let this happen, sent these locusts to do this, to eat every green thing in the whole land of Israel. This horrible famine resulted from this because Israel was, of course, as always, going astray, worshiping idols, doing evil, provoking the Lord. Verse 2 says, Hear this, you elders, and give ear, all you inhabitants of the land. Has anything like this happened in your days, or even in the days of your fathers? Tell your children about it. Let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. What the chewing locust left, the swarming locust has eaten. What the swarming locust left, the crawling locust has eaten. What the crawling locust left, the consuming locust has eaten. Awake, you drunkards, and weep and wail, all you drinkers of wine. Anyway, so you can see that it's not only... and what I have written here is, tell your children not only of miraculous deliverance, but of severe consequences of disobeying. When you're teaching your children the righteousness of the law, righteousness, justice, the way of the Lord, when you're teaching your children this, teaching them the commandments of God, the law of God, that you are teaching them as you're walking by the ways, you're sitting down, as you're rising up, that you have posted on your doorpost and on your gates. When you're teaching them all these things, and you're setting up all these memorials that they'll be asking about, and you can tell them about the miraculous ways God has worked for you, don't forget to tell your children also the consequences that you have seen and faced, and that have come down to us through the generations of disobeying. Not just the blessings and the miracles of obedience, of being on God's side, but let them know the terrible consequences that befell those who rebelled against God, and the terrible consequences that will come to all those who have ultimately chosen to rebel against God until their dying day. So it's got to be even. There's got to be balance. The miracles and the blessings that come with following God, and the consequences, the evil that befalls those that don't follow God. So that's one thing we can learn there. Ephesians, now we're in the New Testament. The New Testament, surprisingly, doesn't have that much about parenting. General Electric Power Company, Galatians, Ephesians, Colossians, Philippians. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4. And you fathers, Do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. Do not provoke your children to wrath. So here you see again the training, and we've already seen from previous verses what this training is, the admonition of the Lord. We've seen from previous verses what this admonition is. Now here is a little bit of wisdom from the Bible about how to impart this training, this wisdom, and this correction. I have written, don't deal with your children angrily, for they'll respond in anger. Raise them using Jesus's method. Okay? When you're teaching your children these things, and especially when you are disciplining your children, do not deal harshly with them. Do not provoke your children to wrath. Okay? There is a type of discipline that you can give your children that will do them no saving good, but will only provoke them. It will only bring out evil from them. If you are angry, do not lay one finger on your child in discipline. You wait until you are calm, until you have prayed, even if it's hours, or even if you have to wait days before you discipline your child. Never lay an angry hand on your child. You are doing them harm and not good. There is no benefit from correction given in our anger. What does it say? The wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. When God does, and you can say, but God does things in anger. Our anger is not God's anger. Our anger is evil. There's a type of anger that we have that taints whatever benefit, whatever wisdom would have been gained by the child from our rod of physical correction or from our rebuke. Remember how it said the rod and the rebuke give wisdom? Well, when you're giving the rod, when you're giving the discipline, or when you're giving this rebuke, it can't be done in anger, or it's going to void the whole benefit. There will be no wisdom, no blessing in that. Okay? You will only be teaching them evil, teaching them the way of Satan, really. The way of wrath and anger and selfishness and uncontrol and undiscipline. Discipline yourself before you discipline your child. So that's a big one. That's a big one. Please understand that. Never yell at a child angrily. That's not the type of rebuke that the Bible is commanding you to do. And never, ever touch your child angrily. Because that's only going to draw out of them anger. Provoking your children to wrath. That'll only draw the same evil out of them. Okay. Colossians. Couple books over. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 21. And it says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged." So here again, you see this idea of provoking children, and instead of the response of drawing wrath out of them, don't provoke your children to wrath. This one says, "Do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged." So again, if you are not using Jesus' method, the fear and admonition of the Lord, if you're not using God's method, then you are provoking wrath. You're drawing out wrath out of them instead of imparting wisdom, and you're hurting their heart. You're making them sad. You're making them discouraged, lest they become discouraged. I have written here again, don't deal angrily with children. They will be hurt and saddened. Okay? So when you're dealing with your children, here's rule number 1. Don't deal with them angrily. Don't provoke them. All right? Because what responses are you going to get? You're going to provoke them to wrath? You're gonna bring anger out of them, unrighteousness, or you're going to discourage them. You're gonna hurt and make them sad. Either one is not God's method. So you can spout off all the Proverbs verses about the rod that you want, but you better not be dealing angrily with them, because you know what? You know what Jesus said? He said it would be better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck, and for you to be thrown in the midst of the sea and drowned, than for you to cause one of these little ones to stumble. And if you deal angrily with your children, if you don't control yourself, discipline yourself before you discipline them, if you provoke them, then you will be causing them to stumble. It says point blank, do not provoke your children to wrath. Do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. So Jesus says if you do that, it will be better for you that a millstone were tied around your neck and you be cast into the sea. It's a serious, serious business. God placed these children in our lives, in our hands. He entrusted his child to us so that we would deal with them in his way, his loving way, by teaching them the fear of the Lord, by teaching them the commands of God, by commanding them to walk in righteousness and justice, by teaching them of God's law, and by giving them consistent, prompt correction. In the method of Jesus, which is the method of love, of compassion, of understanding, of mercy, of self-control, not of anger. You understand? All right, that's it. That's all I've got. So, and it's all, it's been 42 minutes. So hopefully, all these verses, hopefully, you've learned something. Hopefully I have learned something, and we will all take this to heart and remember to do these things as we care for the children that God has entrusted to us. God bless you.